Okay, you're welcome again to the presentation. What we're going to cover this afternoon is the process for applying to become a member and how do you ensure that your CA diary is correctly completed. We'll look at some common errors, for example, there. I'm also going to cover some information which will be pertinent for some who are engaging with the webinar and not relevant for others. So I'll make that clear as we proceed through. And then my colleague Karen is going to take you through opportunities and requirements in terms of CPD. So we'll press on. So Stephen Covey, the late Stephen Covey, authored a very fine book by the name of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So taking one of those habits, we're going to begin with the end in mind. What you're aiming to do is to complete your requirements so that you will be enabled to apply to become a member of Chartered Accountants Ireland. On the screen, you'll see a photograph which shows a typical conferring ceremony, and it's a great, typically a great source of celebration for all of our trainees, staff, and the training organisations as well. When we were in a position to hold these physical events. At the time of recording, that is not possible. However, there are some plans in place to look at the option of conducting some virtual conferring ceremonies, which will allow those who have graduated in 2020 to participate even virtually in what is traditionally a very well run and a great source of celebration. So in order to get to that stage, what you need to do, and I'll talk through this today, is your CA diary needs to be complete. Obviously you need to have passed the final admitting exam. So if you're engaging with a webinar or the recording and you've passed the FAE, huge congratulations to you. It's a monumental achievement to get to that stage, and as you can see there on the screen, that's you having met one of the requirements. If you've passed the FAE, the other requirement, of course, is that your CA diary is completed. Once your diary is complete, and I'll talk you through that process, you're eligible to get an application, a web link and an application to admission to membership. And then you press on and become a Chartered Accountant, ACA. Now, for those that are engaging just now, you might be aware that there's two remaining deadlines for this year, 27th of October, and then the last opportunity to become a member following the deadline on the 8th of December. So our oversight board will be meeting shortly after those deadlines. And that's the board that oversees the admission of new members. There will be further deadlines for 2021, and they're published on the Admissions to Associate Membership webpage. So in terms of the process then, there's a number of steps that need to be completed, and I'm going to talk you through them at each stage. So the completion of the period of training. So you may be engaging with the webinar as a flexible route student, or more likely as a training contract student, or someone who may have completed a training contract. In both cases, you are required to meet that requirement that you've completed your set period of training. Once that's happened, there's a final review becomes available to you. Once that's recorded, there's an application to membership will become available to you. Once you've submitted your application to membership, the Institute will conduct a review of your CA diary record, which we do for all applicants. And if you've successfully passed that last stage, then you've got the checkered flag and you're good to go towards the Oversight Board for approval as a member. So in those steps then, as I've said, as well as passing the FAE, you have to complete your period of experience. your recognised experience for qualification period, which for most trainees is 3.5 years. That's an undergraduate degree entrant. So it's 3.5 years. So if you're in a training contract, you will know, or you should know, what the start and end date of your training contract is. So that contract needs to be expired before you can complete your CA diary requirements. If you're a flexible route student and you have your FAE, your FAE is passed, yeah, and you've got your period of training completed, that needs to happen as one of the fundamental requirements. It's not a set training contract period. Flexible route students do have 8 years to meet requirements, although the majority of flexible route students will meet their requirements way before that period. So the minimum requirement needs to be met, whether it's for you 3.5 or 3 years or 4 years, depending on your educational background. Now, if you've completed your period of training, you need to be eligible for a final mentor review. And that those criteria are specified in the trainee user guide, and I'm going to be signposting you to some documentation and resources. But as I've said in the previous slide, your REQ period needs to be completed. Again, for most, that is a training contract period of either 3.5 or 4 years. And the same would apply for flexible route students, as I've just said. So all diary entries have to have a status of locked. To tip in straight away on a common mistake, a common error, a lot of the times trainees are understandably anxious to get the final mentor review and want to do that as quickly as they can. And in their haste to get a final mentor review, they go and select a request for a 6-month review. Now, if they already have the minimum number of 6 monthly reviews, as you'll see on the screen, that's 5, there is no requirement for a further 6-month review. So by requesting a further 6-month review, that actually can slow down the process. So just be careful that you're not requesting a 6-month review if, in fact, what you're actually seeking is a final review. They're very similar in format from a mentor's perspective, but from a system perspective, they're quite different. And the final review is a separate and distinct metric that the system is watching out for. You have to have met all your competency requirements also to get a final review, and I'll show you and remind you what those are shortly. You have to have attained your minimum number of required days based on your REQ period. Okay, so that typically for trainees on a 3.5-year contract, the minimum number of required days is 682. That's actually the targeted requirement of 682. Now, again, based on the current pandemic, we understand that trainees may have been laid off for short periods during the initial stages of the pandemic, and therefore you should know that there is a bit of flexibility in that 682. If you have any questions about the number of days, we'll be happy to answer them as we go along. In addition to all of those points, the eligibility requirements for a final review, as I've said earlier, are that you have a minimum of 5 6-monthly mentor reviews. So they need to be on your record. And as you should be aware, those reviews should be recorded on a regular basis throughout the period of training and not retrospectively applied at the end. So competencies. Core competencies have to be demonstrated. So if you think of this as a checklist for yourself, have you demonstrated all of the core competencies to the integrate level? So professional values, all of those elements need to be met. The business environment, all of those elements need to be met. And in financial reporting, the first 4 of 6 elements, FA1 to FA4, have to be met at the integrate level. Okay, so that's your core competency requirements. Additionally, for all trainees, in terms of meeting the competency requirements, they have to demonstrate the core competencies plus a minimum of one area from either auditing, tax, finance, or IT. So this is a check that you can do on your own CA diary record. And it's worth pointing out that you won't know what status you're at with your competencies, which ones you've hit, and at which level, until your mentor has approved all your entries. And again, the idea is that this is done progressively, and the requirement is that your diary is updated and reviewed regularly throughout the contract. So you should not have any surprises at the end of your training contract. So integrate level is where you need to be for all core competencies, and one from either auditing, tax, finance, or IT. In terms of the auditing one, a common question we get asked is, do I need to meet all the requirements in the auditing and auditing other group? And the answer is you don't have to meet all of those competency elements across those two groups. A combination of all elements across the two groups is sufficient. So if you have 11 audit competencies and you have 5 in auditing and you've got 6 in auditing other, the system will deem you as having met that requirement. Another question that we're asked on a regular basis is, do I have to have all of my CA diary entries locked in at the understands and the applies and the integrate level? And the answer is no. The typical progression would show a trainee, typically in a contract, from year 1 it understands, year 2 apply, and year 3 and beyond integrate. However, it is not a requirement that you would have to have all of those competency groups at all 3 levels. The professional development requirements document will explain that to you in detail. So let's assume you're in the position where you have met all of your requirements as specified there on the last screen. You've completed your training period, competencies, etc. What this system is doing on a nightly basis is performing a check to identify all trainees that have met all of those requirements. If you've met all of those requirements, there's nothing unlocked on your diary entries or reviews, you've met all of the requirements on the previous screen, then the system will flag you as eligible for a final review. And as you can see on the slide there, under the menu, you will have a new option on your dashboard, a request for a final review. If you don't see that option, it would usually mean that you haven't met all of those requirements. So if that's the case and you're expecting to see a final review, I would urge you to go back to the trainee user guide and review all those requirements and cross-check your own record against them. If you've met all of those requirements and it's been 24 hours since your mentor last performed any approval activity on your record, you should have the final review. If you don't, and you're satisfied that all the conditions have been met, please contact us at the training support mailbox I'll give you at the end, and we can check it for you. So once your mentor, once you have become eligible for a final review, you can request it or your mentor can complete it without requesting it, but you need to have that menu option on your record. But once that final review has been locked in by your mentor, there's another overnight process takes place. So the final review is locked in, and the system will then, again, provided you've passed the FAE, and if there are trainees who have completed all the training requirements in the training period or training contract, but haven't passed the FAE, they can complete their diaries, and it's recommended that that is done so up to and including the final review. The difference is trainees who have passed the FAE and have a final mentor review will, again, following another overnight process, have access to the admission to membership request. And again, it's an additional item that you'll see on your menu as shown there on the slide. If you've got access to that link, then you are moving towards becoming a member. And once you access the application to apply, you will see there's a 5-step process as shown on screen. So at this stage, you are following the guidelines there. And if you have any difficulties or questions or challenges with the system around this particular piece, you would direct them to the admissions to membership team. So there's information coming up, contact details coming up at the end of this presentation for that. Now, as was shown earlier, the final stage, the final check is that the Institute, the Training Support Unit, will conduct a review of your CA diary record. What we want to do is make sure that there are no omissions or errors that could prevent you from going on to become a member. Your mentor obviously has a very important role to play in ensuring that you've met all of your requirements and that your entries are within the parameters that we're expecting to see. So that's an expectation we have of your mentor. Unfortunately, there are times when diary entries are approved which are not to a satisfactory standard, and therefore sometimes we do have to ask for corrective action to be taken. So you want to avoid that position where you can. So some of the common errors: the learning levels do not match documented experience. When me and my colleagues review CA diary records at this point, sometimes we see a trainee who has commenced a training contract, and their first year they've recorded their entries at the applies or the integrate level. Now that is possible for somebody that's got a bank of prior experience prior to the contract commencing, but usually for a trainee that's just setting out on a 3.5 year or 4 year training contract, it's highly unlikely that they would be performing at the integrate level in that early part of the training period. So as a tip for you, I would suggest review your CA diary entries, and you can use your PDF report that you can download from your dashboard. Have a look at the grid that summarizes all your diary entries. Do your learning levels flow from the initial ones being understands, into applies or integrate? That's the typical way it should flow. There are trainees who have an irregular journey towards the end of their training contract, and that may be because they're working in industry and they're subject to rotations. So that's understood that you don't always flow through understands to applies and then integrate, but usually that is the case. But it's important that the learning level selected and therefore approved is appropriate to the level that you are working at. Second common error: entries solely for study leave. We do fairly often see diary entries being recorded solely for a period of study leave. So if it's FAE or Cap 2 study leave, and the trainee has been out of the business for maybe 6 weeks, maybe more, the trainee is not entitled to select any competencies, because remember, competencies should be related to work experience gained. So there should be no competencies and there should be no days served claimed. And trainees will often say to us, but the system's forcing me to take at least one competency, which is correct. There's a mandatory requirement for at least one competency element to be claimed. However, the way this should be approached is that any leave period is tied in with a work experience period. Okay, so that's an important piece, and do look at the trainee user guide, which explains that for you. The narrative is very brief and doesn't support the number of claimed competencies. I've personally reviewed diary entries in the past weeks where the trainee might have 15 or 16 competencies claimed and about 3 or 4 sentences to describe what they did during the period. There has to be a good structure to your diary entries, and there has to be supporting narrative as to why you've claimed those competency elements. It's worth pointing out that for those that are not going to be applying for admission to membership before this year is out, we are changing the functionality on the way that trainees record and update CA diary entries. And this will be a lot more clear in the new functionality. However, for now, just I suppose as a rule of thumb, just make sure your narrative supports the competencies that you've claimed. Entries are typically recommended to be 1 month in duration. If they're not, then it's okay to have them. Anything up to 3 months is considered acceptable. If it's more than 3 months, you're running into difficult territory because it's very hard to demonstrate progression, and your narrative would need to be extremely long to support a period of more than 3 months work experience. So it's recommended that you don't have any diary entries that are covering more than 3 months, and that is 3 months work experience. I mean, it is possible to have one entry that's got work experience and leave built into it, and sometimes that can knock over the 3 month limit, but that's okay. But it's about the work experience period there. Sometimes trainees are recording diary entries beyond the contract end date. The system technically shouldn't permit it, but sometimes it does. Please ensure that your first diary entry is the start date of your contract or thereabouts, and that your end date of your last diary entry coincides with the end date of your training contract. So those are some of the common errors that we see. If you've passed the review and you've got to that stage, as I say, you're golden, you're in a really strong position because you're going to be put forward to the oversight board who would hopefully then endorse you as a member of Chartered Accountants Ireland. So that's a fantastic position to be in and to be aiming towards. I did mention the audit qualification. I'm going to just give a little bit of information on this. It is not relevant for everyone, okay? If you're working in a regulated practice environment and you're gaining statutory audit experience, then you may meet the requirements for the audit qualification. And it's very important to note, and this causes a lot of confusion, the audit qualification has no impact on your application to membership or your status as a chartered accountant. It's a qualification that sometimes trainees will meet the requirements for after they become a member. You do not have to have met these requirements to become a member. Okay, so the requirements are documented on the web page that will show you. You have to have completed your training in a recognised training firm and supervised by a statutory auditor, also known as a responsible individual. You also have to have passed the FAE, including the audit elective. Your CA diary must show that you have a minimum of 46 weeks practical training. In the Republic of Ireland, that is in the area of statutory audit. Other audit does not count towards your 46 weeks. In Northern Ireland, or UK experience for audit, the 46 weeks can be made up of at least 23 weeks in statutory audit, with the balance in other audit work. I don't want to get into a lot of technical detail on this presentation, and I won't, but I will signpost you to documentation around this and resources. The last requirement for the audit qualification is that your audit experience is signed off by a responsible individual. That's your statutory auditor in the firm, and so that's the final requirement. If you've met all those requirements and you've provided a sufficient level of detail in your CA diary record, then you may be awarded the audit qualification after you become a member of Chartered Accountants Ireland. If you've not met those criteria, or you've not given us enough detail on the audit engagements, then you may have an option in the future to apply for the audit qualification. For those that are in that position, working in practice, or having trained in practice and gained statutory audit experience, I would suggest strongly that you read the CA Diary Guide to Recording Audit Days. I'll show you where that is shortly. There is information and a lot more detail than I'm going into in this presentation around the audit qualification requirements. So if you go in to the current students and go to the support and services tab, you'll see a link to the audit qualification requirements. Okay, again, only for those that have been working in statutory audit and practice and have passed the audit elective. General resources around the CA Diary, you should be aware of this at this stage. However, as a reminder, the CA Diary resources page contains a lot of information, such as the guides that I've been mentioning already in this presentation. Do take the time to familiarise or re-familiarise yourself with those key documents. There's also on-screen tutorials which may not be of use to you at this point in your progression, but they're there for you and maybe for some of your junior trainees. There's also a lot of resources for mentors. We get a lot of questions and queries from mentors, and we're more than happy to respond to those. There are a lot of detailed guidance documents and on-screen tutorials available for mentors as shown on the screen. The training support unit are more than happy to assist any trainees or mentors with any questions or issues pertaining to the CA Diary, or indeed for those that may be interested in finding out more about the audit qualification. The training support unit consists of myself, Judy, Cassie, Nicola and Anna. If you have any questions, you can direct them to the training support mailbox or the on-screen telephone numbers there. We're more than happy to support you. We would have an expectation that you would have reviewed the resource documents before reaching out to us. So, you know, provided that you've taken the time to review them, hopefully your answers to your questions will be there. If not, do feel free to reach out to us. Once you move on to eligibility for an application to membership, and if you have any questions at that point, it's around the application rather than the CA Diary. Rose Cotter, our colleague in the Registry and Subscriptions Department, will be more than happy to assist you with any queries there. Okay, what I'm going to do now is just invite my colleague Karen to join us in the presentation, and Karen's going to give you some information on CPD requirements for members, requirements and opportunities. Over to you, Karen.
Thanks, Hugh. Okay, so I just need to check now that everybody can see my screen okay.
Coming up well, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. That's great. So hello everybody. What I'm going to do this afternoon is just take you through some high-level requirements in terms of CPD once you've been admitted as a member. Now, I will admit and say, look, this can be quite a complex area, so I'm just going to give you a high-level overview. It is something you'll need to spend a little bit of time you know, looking at when you've been admitted as a member, but I'm going to try and simplify it for you in as much as I can. So basically, once you become a member, you are required to complete CPD. So in other words, the reason for this is to make sure that you are competent as a professional to basically, I suppose, do your job. So whether that's in practice or in industry, and that then relates to both the technical side of your skills and also the non-technical side. But most importantly of all, really the requirement in terms of CPD is around making sure that your career evolves and that you have the skills requirements to help you to make the most of your career, and that you are developing and advancing, particularly in a time where skills requirements are rapidly evolving. And we've one stat from the World Economic Forum that predicts that 42% of current skills will be outdated by 2022. So most importantly of all, rather than just focusing on, I suppose, your requirement as a member, it's really making sure that you have the skills requirements to advance your career. So really it's up to you to decide on what those learning activities look like and what you need to do to make sure that you are a professional and competent individual. And also then you get to choose from a number of options in relation to undertaking that CPD. So I'm going to take you through those now. So broadly speaking, you've got the input approach and the output approach. So input, as the title would indicate, is focused on what the activity that you put into achieving your CPD, and I'll talk to you about that in a little bit more detail shortly. And the output side then is focused on the actual learning outcomes, so very similar to the CA diary approach in terms of looking at the learning outcomes. So the input approach, which is the more traditional measure of CPD, focuses on the amount of learning activities that you undertake. So typically it would take the form of 20 hours structured CPD, and I'll explain to you exactly what that looks like in a few moments, and then 50 hours unstructured. And what we do as an organization is we would review that on a 3-year rolling period. So you do have time in which to cover that, but in any 1 year you do need to complete a minimum of 20 hours structured or unstructured. So you might say to me, what is unstructured and structured? So if we look at structured firstly, as the title would indicate, it's like the likes of, say, courses, conferences, seminars, and any formal type of study typically, but also too, if you're preparing for a presentation that is a technical presentation, you're going to be a speaker at a conference. So that is, I suppose, that anything that has that formal or structured approach to it. In the unstructured category then, as again the hint is in the name, it's basically scenarios where you might be doing, say, home study at home, where there are no specific classes involved in it, there are no specific assessments, you're not interacting with any individuals per se, but it could be something that you look at a video on YouTube, for example, that is relevant from a professional perspective. That would count as unstructured CPD. Similarly, if you were involved in meetings that are connected with networks and focus groups, that would also count. And also then reading content, so financial content in the newspaper. So again, that would count as unstructured CPD. So a couple of terms there, but I think if you read through them again afterwards, and we can make the slides available, and also this is being recorded as well, as far as I know, you can look back over this again. So you have the input method, which has your structured and unstructured CPD. And then you also have the output approach, which again, the name, the hint is in the title, and it really is around measuring the learning outcomes. So it's not about the hours, it's not about counting your hours, it's looking at what your specific training or development needs are, showing that you have put some thought into that, and then what the outcomes for you have been in that space, so how you've developed through that. And I suppose the other difference here is that there is an annual requirement to submit your full detailed requirements around this, whereas with the input approach, you can actually record it or look at it over an average of 3 years. So what do we look for as evidence of your output, of the output method? So we would look at work logs that have been verified against an external competency map. We would look at independent practice inspection. So maybe if you're working in a practice and there's been an audit or a practice inspection by CARB, for example, and also then an assessment of your learning outcomes. So a detailed review of what you have learned, and also any evaluation of written or published material. So what will your CPD requirements be for as a new member? And that's probably the question that is top of your mind. So basically, we look at your CPD requirement from the date that you are admitted. So it's not from the time you finish your exams, it's from the date that you're actually admitted as a member. And if you have studied for your exams in the year that you were admitted, you're unlikely really to need to undertake additional CPD, because you'll have, like studied recently, will have taken your exam, so you will be up to date. However, if there is a gap between when you did your exams and when you're admitted, you will need to comply with the CPD regulations in full for the year that you were admitted as a member. So, you know, if there's, I suppose a lesson here is, you know, to apply for membership as soon as possible, because you won't necessarily have a CPD requirement in that year. The other question we often get asked is about, you know, when you move from practice to industry, do your requirements change in terms of those requirements? And I suppose, yes, they can, because under the input approach, if you're a member working in practice, you do have specific requirements in relation to having to complete 10 hours structured CPD in relation to the specific areas that you're working in. So, for example, if you're working in audit, you do need to complete 10 hours structured CPD for audit if you're working in practice. But if you move to industry, you don't have to do that. So your requirement to complete specialized areas of CPD will change. And then if you're taking the approach, the output approach, the only difference is that you may need to reevaluate your actual learning or training requirements, because you may have a different focus in your role in industry than what you had in practice. So it's really just to review your own training requirements during that time. A question that we get asked quite a lot is, are only Chartered Accountants Ireland CPD courses eligible for CPD? And the answer here is no. So that once, like, you complete a course and it's relevant and it's of a suitable standard, then you can use that towards your CPD accreditation. Obviously, we have a whole range of courses that you can avail of, but you don't have to use only our courses. So there are other options open to you. The other question we get asked is around a career break, typically, because some members, you know, will want to take time out and maybe go traveling, maybe not so much currently, but just so that you're aware, if you are taking a career break, you are exempt from CPD during that time once you notify us that you're going on a career break. But if you are, when you are returning to the workplace, you do need to make sure that immediately preceding or just after returning to the workplace, that you make sure that you undertake sufficient CPD to ensure that you are competent and that you can fulfill the duties of the role that you have started in. So recording and tracking your CPD, what do you need to do here? So basically, as a member, you will be responsible for maintaining and retaining your CPD records. Now, these can take any format you wish, so you can decide on format, whether it's in Word or Excel, but we do have some suggested templates and formats on our website that I know members find very useful. So I would suggest that you have a look at those there. But the main thing to remember here is that you need to maintain or retain those documents for a minimum of 5 years in case you're audited, that you can actually show those records. So that's the key learning here from that, is to retain those for 5 years. And then you might ask, well, how will I be reviewed? So basically, as a member, you will have to make an annual declaration confirming compliance with your CPD. So you will have to do that on an annual basis, irrespective of whether you're applying the input or output approach. And also then we do carry out periodic reviews of CPD records. That's something that is done by our professional standards team, and they would do ad hoc checks. So you will be notified requesting, access to your records. So just to point out again, and a couple of key points here is really that CPD is an opportunity to keep your professional development going. Obviously, you've studied hard to get to this point, and you want to maintain your professional competence. It will ultimately help in terms of your career development and help you to keep pace with changes in the market. Will make sure that you have a sustainable career ahead of you. Secondly, we are here to help you. There's a team within our CPD department. If you have any queries whatsoever, reach out to us, because we do know that it's difficult as well sometimes to get your head around this initially. So do reach out to us with any questions or queries. do take a bit of time to study this, because I think if you can get the process right for yourself at the early stages, it will, I suppose, cut out a lot of time for you. So again, the earlier you start with this, the better. But do reach out to us, and support is available. I'm happy to take any questions now. So I think that covers everything that I have to say today, Hugh. I know there's a lot of information there, but certainly happy to take any questions and queries now, or certainly afterwards as well.
Thanks very much, Karen. Very insightful presentation as always. Clearly there are requirements for CPD, but the opportunities certainly are vast. I'll just conclude the presentation content for now, and then there's an opportunity to take a look at any questions. So what we've covered today in this webinar is the process for applying to become a member, and the steps and to ensure that your CA diary record is correctly and fully completed. I did go through some information for those that are looking to meet the audit qualification requirements, and then the requirements and opportunities in CPD is very well covered by Karen. So thanks again, Karen, for that. Again, this is a point where we might just have a look and see if we've got any questions. My colleague Cassie should be there. So Cassie, can you give us an indication if there's any questions?
Yeah, so there's been lots of questions throughout the session. So I've gone back to a number of trainees. We had some training contracts, CA diary, little things. So those have all been answered, and people can look at the answers to those under the question sections. There are two that I was waiting. Karen, you might be able to advise. There's one girl, she's wondering if she became a member at the end of the month, would she have to complete 20 hours CPD by December 2020?
Okay, so I would need to have a chat with her specifically around that, because it will depend on when she completed her exams, and so if she had completed her exams this year, the likelihood is no, that she wouldn't. But if she hasn't, she won't have to complete 20 hours, because as I mentioned earlier, it's covered on a 3-year rotation or 3-year rolling basis. So she won't have to cram in 20 hours, but even if she could get some done and then carry over the rest for and spread it out over a 3-year period. To be fair, we are very reasonable in that space, and there wouldn't be an expectation that, look, you need to do that 20 hours in such a short time frame, but you'd need to be able to show that you had started something and have a plan to kind of map that out going forward.
Okay, thank you. So there's kind of a similar one here. I passed my FAE exams in 2019. I have to submit a declaration on CPD in October 2020. Does this count as sitting exams in the year of the declaration, or is it in the calendar year?
Okay, so again, that's probably one that I'd need to just take offline, because there's a couple of different dimensions there. But basically, what we need to look at is, when the person completed the exam. So if they've completed the exams in the year that they are being admitted, it's unlikely that they'll need to do CPD. But if there's a gap between the time that they finish their exams and they're admitted, then they will most likely have to comply with the CPD requirement for that year.
Okay, perfect, thank you. One more there. Are pre-recorded webinars on the website, under the professional development website, considered structured or unstructured CPD?
Okay, it will depend on the content of the course, but if it is, I suppose, again, it depends on the content. So I suppose I'd need to know exactly what the topic is there, because not all topics are covered by CPD. So again, if that person wants to just pop me an email in terms of what exactly they have in mind, I'm happy to deal with that query offline.
Okay. There's a couple of more coming through here. Sorry, I'm just trying to see this one. If we're on officially reduced hours, I'm for 7 months now, working some weeks 60 or 80%. Is the 3.5-year contract changed? So this is obviously as an impact of COVID-19. I have had a couple of queries with regards to this already. I guess Hugh, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we would be encouraging trainees to discuss this with their training firms. If your relevant experience days is impacted, severely as a result of this, and you're not claiming the relevant competencies, then there's potentially you may need to have an extension to your training contract. Hugh, do you want to add in anything else there?
Yeah, no, I think you've captured that well, Cassie. We do need to look at individual circumstances in some cases, but you're right to say that the individuals that are affected by this should have a discussion with the training partner in the first instance. We will do what we can to ensure that trainees are positioned to be able to meet the requirements, and in some cases, for some trainees, that may necessitate an extension to the training contract. But it really just depends on the individual. If there are any follow-up questions in terms of a potential extension to a training contract, I would encourage anybody with those questions to contact student queries at charteredaccountants.ie. Colleagues and student services will be able to answer any questions pertaining to potential contract extensions. So student queries at charteredaccountants.ie.
Perfect. Do we record overtime for any given month? Just log extra days in the diary entry. So a similar question to that has come in earlier as well. So there is an option to record your overtime within your diary. So when you are creating a diary entry, just make sure that you're capturing that in the particular diary entry. Another question that came in earlier as well was with regards to the relevant experience days. So the total relevant experience days is displayed. Any overtime is displayed separately then beneath that, and that is taken into consideration when we do review your CA diary at admission to membership.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Is there anything else there? Is that right? Yeah.
No, you're spot on.
Okay. So here, this trainee is saying they noted from earlier in the session that the second deadline to CA diary membership is in December. Her contract finishes on the 11th of December. Does that mean that I won't meet this deadline? So do we have the exact date? Yeah, so the date of the admission is the 8th of December 2020. So
what I would suggest for that one, it's probably unlikely that trainee will meet that deadline. There might be no harm in just dropping an email to Rose, and that's admissions@charteredaccountants.ie, just to explain those circumstances. Obviously there's 2 overnight processes need to take place after the end of the contract. So if the contract finished on the 8th, it would be the 10th. Before the requirements will be met. So the 2-day rollover there. But Rose should be able to answer that question, admissions@charteredaccountants.ie.
Okay, so we still have a few more coming in, so I'll keep going through them. We still have a few minutes. So we have a trainee completing their contract in January 21. Can I expect there to be a deadline date in early 2021 for admission to membership? And I would say yes, that there likely is to be one within Q1 of 2021. So that would potentially, I think this year, was it in April? Did we have one in April?
As far as I remember, there was one in February, Cassie.
Or is it February?
Yeah, the dates won't be set yet. They will be fairly soon, and they will be published on that webpage, the admissions webpage. So just now, we don't know what they are. I suspect if it's anything like 2020, which is an atypical year in so many ways, but I suspect there should be a deadline for February, and then subsequent ones following on April, beyond, etc. But keep an eye on that webpage.
Perfect. So there's another one in here. He completed FE exams in 2019, so similar to the previous questions that Karen answered. Out of contract in April 21. wanting to know, will you have to complete CPD hours in 2021 ahead of admission to membership? So I guess this is another one that would have to be looked at that time,
yeah, like
when it
if
comes
he did his exams in when did you say he did his exam? Sorry.
FAEs in 2019.
Yeah, so he'll have to complete like the CPD requirement for the full year in 2021.
Okay, perfect. This looks like an issue. When entering a diary entry on the website, is there a help option when it says the entry contains an error? I've double checked my entry to ensure there is no errors and it won't save. Okay, so for any errors that you are getting, I would recommend that you take a screenshot and email it to trainingsupport@charteredaccountants.ie, and we'll have a look at it. If you are getting an error, one thing I would say is to double check the entry start date, particularly if it's your first diary entry that you're recording. So if you're in a contract, your entry start date has to be the start date of your training contract. So that was something that has cropped up, but do send us an email and we can look at that for you.
Yeah, and if you can just include all relevant fields, it might be 2 or 3 different screenshots, but show all relevant fields. Sometimes it's a mandatory field that's been missed, but as Cassie says, if you just send the screenshots, we'll certainly take a look at it and get it resolved for you.
Yeah, so next one. Am I right in saying all mandatory competencies as well as the additional competency area have to be at integrate level, but not necessarily at apply and understand?
Yeah, that's correct, Connor. That was covered earlier. So you don't have to have all your core competencies and your technical area understands and apply and integrate. The requirements are integrate level. So if you look at the professional development requirements document, that sets out those requirements for you.
Perfect. This question has come in a couple of times as well. This trainee has completed 682 days, but not her 3.5-year contract. Can I apply for membership? I've already reverted back on this, and the answer is no. You have to complete the duration of your training contract period. So you have a 3.5 years relevant experience that you need to gain. So your days will just keep accumulating over time, but you have to complete the 3.5 years.
Yeah, and that is one of the requirements for a final
Yeah.
mentor review, as I said earlier on. So that's correct. Yep. Thanks, Cassie.
Here we have, what is the deadline for CADI submission for people whose training contract is finished on the 31st of October 2020? So 31st of October 2020, you'll be, I guess, preparing yourself for the December admission to membership deadline. So, you just be keeping on top of things and making sure that you have all of your relevant experience and everything up to date, so you're not putting yourself under pressure when it comes to December. So there's you'd have missed this month's admission to membership. So I'll just take a couple of more, and then if we don't get to any of these queries, so there still are a couple coming through, please do email us and we can take them offline. I've done all of my exams and my experience day. Okay, so that's the same question again. So no, so you have to complete the full duration of your training contract period, regardless of the days. Here's one on audit qualification. If you get the audit qualification, do you have to have any additional CPD requirements relating to audit specifically after that, or is it just general CPD? So I guess this is about maintaining the audit qualification CPD.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that would depend on at what point you're awarded or you're deemed to have met the audit qualification requirements. If you're deemed to have met those automatically following admission to membership, it's not a requirement for that audit qualification that CPD requirements are demonstrated. However, for those trainees that want to apply for the audit qualification, rather, I should say, for those members who wish to apply for the audit qualification, after the period that they were admitted to membership, there is an application form that needs to be submitted, and as part of that you just need to confirm that you're aligned with your CPD requirements. So it depends on whether you're awarded those requirements at the point of admission to membership, or if it's a subsequent application that CPD requirements don't come into it if you've just been admitted to membership.
Okay, Perfect, thanks you. I'm just going to take one last one, okay? And then I think we've covered nearly all of them. So if there is anything, then please do drop us an email. But this last one says, what do you do when your assigned mentor has left the firm? If you're in a training contract with a training firm, you need to contact them directly. So the HR contact there should be able to assist. So the firm are responsible for ensuring that your mentor is up to date. So where a mentor leaves, this needs to be updated. It's also important to try and get your CA diary up to date before your mentor actually leaves the firm, if possible. So you have all of your relevant experience recorded. So that is that. So I'm conscious that it's just 2 o'clock on the button now, so we'll come to a close. So again, please send any additional queries to training support at charteredaccountants.ie, and we will revert back to you as soon as possible.
Thanks very much, Chrissy, for managing the questions and responding to a lot of those. Thanks very much again to Karen also for some really good input into the requirements and opportunities for CPD. Thanks to all who have engaged with this either in the live setting or in the recorded webinar, and we wish you all the very best going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.